as we kick off our Park District planning. This is the first Park District community meeting. I know we have a couple chairs open. If there's a chair next to you that's vacant, raise your hand. And if you need a chair, can you come go ahead and join one of those 2 chairs here? There's a couple more here. So the setup for the room is such that we're actually going to ask folks to have conversations later. So there might be some moving around once we kick off with that part. So, you know, if you're sitting somewhere, it's not exactly the spot you want to be, there's going to be an opportunity to move around as well, so don't worry about it. But I guess I'll start off introducing myself. My name is Jesus Aguirre. I'm the Superintendent of Seattle Parks and Recreation, and I'm really excited to have you all here. I will say that we've got both the Seattle channel here trying to capture all of this, because part of what we're trying to do is really make sure that we're documenting and sharing all the information that we hear from folks. And also to let you know that we have some translation services around available for folks. We've got folks who can translate into Spanish, Chinese, and Cantonese. If you are interested, our translating services are in the back. And then we're going to get started. So what will happen today is I'll go through some slides in the presentation, and then we'll actually put you to work in sharing the information, sharing with you what your thoughts are on the Park District. Any questions so far? Okay, didn't even give you a chance to ask questions, but I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So we are here today to talk about the Park District and to talk about sort of our planning process, but I wanna obviously remind folks that at the Department of Seattle Parks and Recreation, we have a clear mission, a clear role that we play in the city, and it's driven by this. So it's driven by the values of helping people be healthy, creating a healthy environment, and then building strong communities. And we try to achieve that mission by sort of providing these opportunities for folks to come together, to contemplate, to recreate, to be active. And then of course we have a significant charge and responsibility around our environment. So as we have all of our conversations today, important conversations, and we want to hear specifically what your unique interests and needs are, it's also important to remember sort of what our mission, our vision is. And as you suggest things and want to see things that we do, remembering that they have to be driven by our mission and our vision. So that's who we are. And so as I said, we're talking about the Park District today. And before we get into it, I want to sort of give a little bit of a Park District 101 just for the folks that haven't been around or need a little bit of a refresher about what the Park District is and what it isn't. Many of you should recall that the Seattle Park District was created back in 2014 by a vote of the residents of the city of Seattle. And it was set up in such a way that it's actually not, it's different than the typical levies. The levy system in the past was every 6 years, every so often we'd go back out to the voters with a slate of projects and say, can we do these things and get a vote of the people? This was set up really to do a couple things and to create some long-term permanent sustainability to the system, some funding that we wouldn't have to sort of every 6 years continue to kind of go out, and that allows us to plan longer term. So the Park District is a permanent tax. Of course, the council can change that if they choose to, but it doesn't have to keep going out to the voters every 6 years. What we do, however, are commit to doing and are required to do is to create a 6-year financial plan. So every 6 years we engage with the public. We put together a financial plan of how we're going to spend the resources available to us as part of the Park District. We are right now in the 6th year of the first 6-year financial plan, so we are engaging in planning for the next 6 years, and that's hopefully what you came out to do tonight. A couple of other points I can't really see. I thought I could see on the mirror over there, but a couple of other points here. Another important thing I want to point out is that the Seattle Park District is absolutely critical for our operations, but it's not everything that impacts what we do at the Department of Parks and Recreation. So the roughly $50 million a year that we get through the Park District represents about 20% of our total budget. So again, critical and important, but we do so much more beyond the Park District, so it's important that when we make, when we make financial plans for the Park District, they have to be aligned with what we do across the rest of the agency. So it can't just be Park District or not. To give you an example, Park District supports community center operations. Well, there's a whole lot of other funding that also supports community center operations. The Park District is just one part of that. And the way the process works, and we'll get into it in a second, so the Park District Oversight Committee, I guess I should have said at the beginning, if you're on the Oversight Committee, can you raise your hand? We have folks here that serve on the Park District Oversight Committee. This is the group that is charged with making a recommendation to us on the 6-year financial plan. That recommendation then goes to the mayor, and then the mayor will propose that to the Park District Governing Board, which is essentially the city council. That's sort of the final arbiter of what's going to be in the Park District. So this, as I said, is the first meeting. If you look at the timeline here, we'll go back over it, but at the very far, your left, my right, that's where we're at. We're at the very beginning, March of 2020, where we're launching public conversations to hear from all of you on what would be your priorities for the Department of Parks and Recreation as we plan in the Park District. We've also been engaging, obviously, with the mayor's office. We've also been briefing and engaging with council members to hear their priorities, and we'll sort of incorporate all of that. Once these series of community meetings are done, then the Park District Oversight Committee will work in various subcommittees to put together this recommendation, this recommended package of potential expenditures for the Park District. That'll happen in May. And then the mayor will take that, and between May and August, she's gonna put together her budget. So if you recall what I said at the beginning, the Park District is just 20% of our total budget. This is a budget year for the city of Seattle, so we have to produce a 2-year budget for the entire department, roughly $260 million. So when the mayor proposes her 2-year budget, the first section of the 6-year financial plan will be included in that budget. So it's all intertwined with what we're doing. She'll submit the budget to her regular budget for Parks and Recreation as part of the 6-year, as well as the 6-year financial cycle, to the council. The council then is planning in September and October to do another set of hearings. So we're having these conversations, and then the council will do also public hearings in their role as the Park District Governing Board to hear again, to give folks another opportunity to come and share their interests and concerns and wishes, et cetera, as part of the Park District. And then in November, the Governing Board, which is the City Council, will approve the 6-year financial plan along with the mayor's 2-year budget for the entire Department of Parks and Recreation. So a lot is happening between now and November, and so these conversations tonight and the next few that we've had are really important as we go through this process. So as we think about the next 6-year cycle, we wanted to just do a couple of quick highlights because, again, this is a new way of doing things for the city, a new way of doing things for Parks and Recreation. We've done a lot of reflecting over the first 6 years. The Oversight Committee, in conjunction with our staff, has put together several reports that sort of highlight some of the great work that has actually been achieved through the Park District, and we're really excited by the enhancements that this funding has provided for the work that we do. A couple of just highlights here. The first cycle, I'm really excited. We piloted a few grant programs that allowed us to provide funding for community-based organizations to help increase recreational opportunities for some communities that we actually had struggled in the past to do so. So the Rec for All, you may have heard, Get Moving, and Arts in the Park were these grant programs that really went a long way and really created literally an additional thousands and thousands of opportunities for folks to recreate. At the same time, it taught us a lot about how to recreate and how to engage with some of the populations and some of the communities that we haven't been doing. And we also think we helped these community-based organizations as they went through the grant process. We worked with them to make sure they had the capacity to participate in these grant programs. So we're very excited to continue to build on those types of programs. You might recall the first cycle was really anchored in fixing the stuff that we have. You know, there's a lot of talk about the deferred maintenance that has been in the system over the eons or the decades and decades of age that our community centers and our facilities have. And so we did a few things. So for example, we invested in creating additional crews, and in this case, I want to highlight we had a shift. We created a new shift that worked overnight, and you may have noticed in the community centers, these folks would come in, so we wouldn't have to close down the facilities. Over the span of a couple of weeks, would come in and do all of the work that needed to be done, whether it's the stuff like changing light bulbs, doing floors, fixing things that were broken, trying to deal with all the work orders overnight, so that we wouldn't have to shut down the buildings. And then that really helped with getting rid of some deferred maintenance. So we think that was very, very successful. We also included funding for new parks. We have 14 properties that were purchased with prior levies that we didn't have money to develop them, the Park District provided funding for all 14, and all 14 will have been started in this first 6-year cycle. Most of them will be done. Well, the majority of them will be done this year. There's, I believe, 5 or 6 that are going to be done in 2021, but they're all either in planning, design, or construction right now. So that was a great opportunity. I think this picture here is Alice Ball Park in the Greenwood neighborhood. I don't know if you can see way in the back, but this is one of our swimming pools, what it looks like when you break the concrete and dig it apart. You know, we also had lots of money for major maintenance, and really looking at how do we preserve these assets. And you know, I'll talk about this in a second, but we know that there was deferred major maintenance, but has anybody ever done any improvements on their home? And if you have a little bit of an older home, this is what it looks like when you break up the bathroom, right? You think you're just fixing a piping issue, and it turns into an electrical issue, it turns into a, you know, on and on. So we learned a lot, but we're able to really invest in our facilities, the community centers, and the pools. We also added additional resources to enhance the cleaning of our most highly used parks and facilities, and really just continuing to focus on making these places welcoming and safe for everyone. The Park District, the first 6-year cycle allowed us to maintain our commitment to the healthy forest and continue our commitment to the Green Seattle Partnership, which is really focused on restoring thousands of acres of forest here in the city of Seattle, and that was tremendously successful. Also continued to provide resources for our accessibility. We have a system that's fantastic. It's robust, but it's old, and some of the access issues, some of the challenges are just make some of our facilities not really accessible to everyone, and so we really focused a lot on that as part of the Park District's first cycle. Did a lot of programming for people, and particularly for folks who didn't have resources to pay for programming, so we eliminated drop-in fees at community centers. We created scholarship programs, over $400,000 for folks who couldn't afford to pay for the programming, to allow them to participate, and we saw great success in that. Also enhanced programming in some of our unique programming, like with our special populations, with our lifelong learning, and of course with some additional enhanced youth programming. And you know, our goal is to continue that work. Our hope is to continue that work. The first 6-year cycle provided some additional expanded resources for our center city parks to really test out how to activate and program these parks in the core of the city, and created lots and lots of activities, lots of events, lots of opportunity for folks to recreate. I'm going to go quickly because there's a lot of slides here, but so in addition to all the great stuff that we did, and we feel pretty successful about the work and delivering the commitments that we had, we also learned a lot. We had a lot of lessons through the first 5 and almost 6 years now that, again, will also inform our planning as we move forward. So a few of these, I won't go through all of them. I already mentioned one thing, for example, when we started tearing up pool decks and looking at the community center needs, it quickly became evident that there was much more need than what we had originally planned for, that obviously was much more expensive, so we had to look for efficiencies and right-size that, and so we've learned about that in our planning and our pricing, and we're going to continue to improve on that. A big focus for the first 6-year cycle is dealing with this deferred maintenance, but we also know that we also have to start thinking about preventative maintenance, so we don't get back into the same situation that we were before, so we're continuing to focus on that. A couple of programs, some of you may know about the Major Projects Challenge Fund, which was designed to provide grants for community-based organizations who could raise money to upgrade or renovate a parks-owned facility, Parks and Recreational facility. We found out that there weren't that many, that there's some equity issues with that. There weren't community-based organizations in every community that needed it that could actually have the capacity to raise those funds. So we're already working on, in the Oversight Committee, with the help of other partners, we're working on rethinking that. And then, of course, some of the obvious stuff, we learned that reducing costs or eliminating costs was incredibly successful. It allowed a lot more folks to participate, and we know that because there was such great demand in the scholarship. So, you know, those are some of the things that we've learned as we've gone along the way that we hope to build on, in addition to the great success. So, I mentioned the Park District is roughly 20% of our total operations. So it didn't make sense for us to just say, well, let's just plan for park districts. So we took a step back and created a strategic planning process over the last couple of years, really robust engagement to really understand both, based on where the city was, where the city is, where the city's going, what should we be doing? And we created this the strategic plan that will be the anchor for all of our work, including for the park district investments. And if you notice, the timeline here is a 12-year timeline. So again, it's important to plan. It's important to plan midterm, but it's also important to plan long-term because our city's changing so much, and the strategic plan really was looking at a 12-year time horizon. And here's some of the numbers. You all know this. This is why it was so important for us to plan. Since the park district was created in 2014 to 2015, over 100,000 people have moved into the city. That's just in these 5 years. The city's demographers expect that another 50,000 people at least are going to move into the city during the next 6 years after that. And we actually think it's going to be more because this 100,000 projection for them was actually their 20-year projection, and we got to it much faster than 20 years. So we think it's going to grow even more. A lot more people moving into the city, a lot more jobs being created, a lot of wealth being created in the city. But at the same time, there's also a growing wealth gap. We have many more folks, for example, who are living on the street or unhoused, 26% increase in that. We've got 88,000 residents in the city living below the poverty line. So the city is changing, and so we needed to plan and ensure that we can respond to that change. The other sort of aspect for us as we think about how we plan for the city and how we plan for the work that we do is sort of redoubling our efforts, our commitment to equity, and this idea that we really are part of an institution, we're part of a government, we're part of a situation in which there are communities that have been underserved and actually been misserved by things like institutional racism, problems in the way that the government worked, problems in the way that the institutions worked. And we are an institution of that and have some role to play in undoing some of that racism in the system. So we thought a lot about how we can do that. And we're going to work on that, again, with all of our operations, but also with the park districts. So think about when we make investments in programs or in facilities to make sure that they're driven by equity and looking at those communities that really have been misserved by our efforts in the past. So when we think about a financial plan, it will be connected to this. We engaged during the strategic planning process. It really has been a 2-year program, but really ramped up here over the past summer, and many of you may have participated in some of this. But we've really done a lot of engagement. Over 10,000 people engaged with us. And that doesn't mean they just saw something on social media or saw a survey, but actually took the effort and participated and told us what they thought. So that's a pretty robust engagement process. We did lots and lots and lots of surveys, including a statistically valid survey that allowed us to get input from representative samples at every single district every single zip code in the city of Seattle. We did lots of events and heard from folks across the city at either our events or events from partnerships. And really, we're just out there trying to hear from folks. What's next? What should we be thinking about? How do we react to the changes in our city? How should we plan for the future? And we got some great input from folks across the city to guide the creation of our strategic plan. And here's sort of kind of the high-level messaging of our strategic planning process. And we sort of looked at the 3 areas of our vision: the healthy people, healthy environment, strong communities. We also added the commitment to equity, pathway to equity, which I talked about. And then we added another category about organizational excellence. So this idea is we continue to try to do our work. We have to know how to do it better. We have to have the capacity to do it. We have to really focus on being responsive and efficient and effective in our work. So these are the priorities that we're focused on, and these are representative. The strategic plan is literally at the printers. It will be released, and it's driven by all this planning process, and it highlights our priorities over the next 12 years. And I think we're going to have these at the tables. If they're not already, we'll pass those out to make sure you have the breakdown there. So we went through, we reflected on the park district, the first 6-year cycle. We've got lots of planning that's been done. We did our strategic planning process. We've engaged with lots of conversations. And so the question then is, so what's next? How do we create a plan for the park district that reflects the priorities of the department writ large? And these are the questions that we sort of are asking ourselves. The first one is pretty straightforward. How can our parks, community centers, pools, and facilities serve more people? You saw the numbers. The city will continue to grow and change. That's one of the questions we're asking. How do we serve more people? How do we continue to build on the great work of the first 6-year cycle in taking care of the stuff that we have? How do we continue to take care of the system that we're really lucky to be charged with? And then the third bucket of things in terms of what the questions we're asking are really about how do we continue to be prepared for a city of the future? It's important to plan for the now, but it's also important to plan for the city that's coming, for the needs of all our residents moving forward. So all of these things are things we're thinking about, and these are representative examples. So for example, should we be adding more hours to our community center operations? Should we be creating a really robust response to climate change, both with our facilities as well as with our educational programs? Do we need new off-leash areas? Do we need more pickleball courts? Do we need more beach access in certain areas? So these are the questions that we're asking. All important questions, but the other piece that I think is really important for all of us here to think about as we think about these and all of the other great ideas that you have is that we also, I talked about this wealth gap that has continued to grow here in Seattle. We need to make sure that every penny that we add to the initiatives that we do, every additional dollar in our budget creates an impact on affordability, creates an impact to the taxpayers. So that's a huge responsibility that we, the Oversight Committee, all of you, all of the elected officials have to keep in mind as we're moving forward, because it would be great to say, look, let's double or triple or quadruple the park district. That's not a feasible plan if we actually care about affordability, we actually care about livability, we actually care about the city of the future. So just some context to keep in mind as we think about planning and prioritizing some of the resources that we're given. So almost done, I promised. So you're gonna start having conversations here in a minute at your tables, and we've had these conversations, as I said, across the city. But as we've had these conversations, I always come back to sort of some of these guiding principles, because these are the principles that are gonna guide my work, that are gonna guide the advice that I give to the mayor in terms of how we're making these investments. And this is what I hope that as you think about it, and you'll get this at your table as well, you think about these things when you start proposing ideas, proposing suggestions for how we're spending any funding in the park district. And the first one is that our job here at Seattle Parks and Recreation is to serve people, to serve the residents and the visitors of the city of Seattle. We build stuff, we maintain stuff, we clean stuff in order to serve people. And so it's really important that drives the work that we do. We also are here to serve all people, but especially the folks that need more, the folks that have been misserved by the system, the folks that are greater risk of health disparities, greater risk of educational disparities, greater risk of public safety, mental health, all those things. So we serve people, but we prioritize equity because we also want to serve the neediest. We also know that at the beginning I shared with you our mission, vision, values. So we know what our charge is at Seattle Parks and Recreation in terms of the city, but we also know that we're part of a city family, and we have to participate in solving these big challenges that the city's dealing with, whether it's affordability, whether it's a homeless or housing crisis, a homeless crisis, et cetera. So we know that we can't operate in isolation. We have to be a part of a broader citywide conversation. The other thing, and this is important for us internally as well as for the folks that we serve, is that all of the initiatives, the policies, the procedures, the practices, the way that we've done things in the past aren't necessarily going to be the same ones that work in the future, because again, the city is changing, we're changing, people's needs are changing, we're aging as a population, we have new potential illnesses that are going to strike our community. So we have to make sure that we're open to a new way of doing things in the way that we operate. We're also really lucky to have one of the best parks and recreation systems in the country that was anchored in an Olmstead Vision for how parks can be part of the livability of a community. We understand that, we have to honor that, but we also, again, have to do that in a way that allows us to think about the future, as I've talked a couple of times. The next bullet here talks about the fact that we serve people, we serve the neediest people, but if we don't talk to you all, then we don't know what we should be doing. So just because we create a strategic plan and we create a financial plan, we want to make sure that it really reflects what the needs and interests of the people that we serve. second to last bullet point here is really critical for us at the Department of Parks and Recreation, given that we're one of the biggest landowners here in Seattle. We have a huge footprint, is that everything we do also has to respond and ensure that we're finding ways to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. We operate, I think, close to or over 500 individual buildings that have an impact on climate, our forests, et cetera. So it's really critical for us to make sure that we include that in our planning and our thinking. And then the last piece is making sure that we're committed to excellence, making sure that we have a team that has the skills, that has the resources, has the capacity to do the work and to deliver on our mission in an excellent way. So as you think about, again, as we have these conversations, remembering those three big questions, remembering the guiding principles is going to be really important for us. So I already showed this to you in a second. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel here in a minute to break this up. But again, this is sort of the timeline that we have. This is the first conversation. We have another meeting on Thursday up in Lake City. We have another meeting on Saturday at Van Asselt. We have surveys that you can continue to take. We've had over 750 people already who may not be able to come to these meetings participate in a survey to tell us what they think as we think about the Park District. You have opportunities at the council to testify and share what your interests are. And then we have cards here at the table that if you don't get a chance to talk about the issue or you think about something on your way out, write it down on the cards and we'll make sure we take that. So there'll be people recording all of this. We're also gonna share all the things that you talk about and all the things that the meetings later on in the week talk about. We're also gonna share those. We're gonna document that and put it online so people know this is what we're thinking about. So I'm gonna stop there and turn it over to Rachel to kind of describe the activity so you can actually talk. Are there any questions about anything I talked about before we turn it over? All right, thank you.
My goal is that everybody gets a chance to talk. Our Park Board and Park District Oversight Committee members are going to help facilitate your conversation. We're going to have a discussion. We have some staff at the table who are going to record every single comment that's given, but we're just going to put on the chart paper a synopsis of that conversation to share out with the group at the end. So we'll just do a quick share out of each table's discussion so we can kind of hear what was said.
Hey, how's it going, y'all? Thanks for coming out tonight. My name's Marlon. I'm with the Park Board, and I sat with a great group of people back there to talk about how we're going to build the park system for the city of the future. Real quickly, the thing that people are really jazzed about that we desperately need for the city of the future is more pickleball, indoor and outdoor. And not just indoor, outdoor, but more of it all the time. In addition, we also talked about bringing more arts and culture opportunities to the parks, not just for the performers, but for the people enjoying it around. Also, we know that demand for recreation is going through the roof, and it's going to continue growing as the city grows. We need more recreation opportunities, but especially for elders and for people with disabilities. Moving on, I talked about the demand for community centers. We need more community center hours and maybe more community centers. But we all know that, yeah, our funding here is limited, but the land in Seattle, it's pretty tough to find new land, especially in this real estate market. So we were talking about how we need to think more strategically about partnerships with other public agencies, to think vertically about community centers and recreation opportunities, and to think about all the land both the school district and all the utilities around here use, to see how we can leverage our strengths to deliver more recreation opportunities. And with that, I can hand it off to who's ever next.
My name is Dennis Cook. I'm with the Park Board also, and we pretty much covered some of the things he talked about: more hours at community center, more pickleball courts, obviously. But we also talked about communication and how the department can maybe do a better job or use another resource on how to reach users and non-users. Programming, as far as marketing the programs. There are members in the community who don't know what programs are going on in our community centers, and so it'd be better if we can do certain things like our publications, our brochures, maybe update those a little bit. PR, sell our Parks and Rec department a little better. I know those who are really involved in community centers who are there daily, they know what's going on, but there are those who aren't there, who don't know what's going on, so how do we reach those people? Scholarships, it was mentioned that in this cycle of budgeting that more money should be donated and geared towards scholarship funding. And also, how do users who can afford to pay at drop-in sites, how do they donate money to those sites to help with the scholarships for others who can't? So kind of help subsidize that program. What else was that? I'm quick. More hours at communities, we said that. Volunteers, there are a number of people who are retirees who would like to volunteer at community centers, they'd like to know how they can do that and who could they talk to. And I did say there is a program in the department already for volunteer coordinator that we have, they have in the department that will help them with that. So pretty much that's it. Did I miss anything? We're good? Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Andrea Akita, and I'm with the Board of Park Commissioners. So our group was recognizing a lot of different activities for intergenerational activities, including pickleball and the arts. We were taking care of our system, and some of the things that came up is ensuring or questions about how does the Parks and Recreation Department look at cost-benefit analyses when it's making decisions and prioritizing the needs with the budget that it has. Suggestions that we should try to be responsive and flexible given the changing demographic and needs of our community. We want to make sure that we're taking care of what we have, and that means looking at deferred maintenance, and we talked about seismic safety needs and improvements, for example, at Pratt Fine Arts Center. We recognize that there are partnerships that are taking place within our system, again, for the folks at Pratt. And then a lot of interest in making sure we can dedicate hours and expand hours, both indoor and outdoor, to things like pickleball, look at being able to have multi-use courts, and then, like others said, increasing the hours of access for our pools and increasing access for things like dog parks.
So we were also getting more out of our system, or taking care of the system. And the general themes were better use of schedules for more open community center hours. Thinking about teens and kids are often in school during the day, but they need hours at night, and then everybody needs hours on the weekends for the full day and not half days on weekends. Investing in transparency of schedules of the facilities so that people can provide input and make easier reservations on the spaces.
Talk into the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Investing more in the transparency of scheduling of facilities so that people can provide more input on, when they have their activities and when they need to use facilities. And be able to see what the schedules are more fluidly on SPR websites. And then activating big land like our golf courses in more ways than just one designated use to reach more people at more hours. And tennis courts, double as pickleball courts was a message, definitely. 4 courts equals 30 people versus however many that would be for tennis. Lighting allows more hours of use, so, and that relates to the bottom one, fixing our assets so that there's more activation on the assets that we have, taking care of it so we can use facilities so that they're not broken and then just not used. Dog use versus designated reserved use. Sometimes there's a conflict there, and being better about working through that with various permitted users and other users that may not have been permitted on those sites. Scheduled events, this was a big one. Scheduled events need to be a priority, not bumped for private events. That, again, going back to scheduling improvements. And certainty of programs advertised in brochures so that people who show up for a certain activity, where do they go if it's not happening, and where can they be redirected, and are those rescheduled or whatnot, and just better use of the facility for activities that are not well attended that day, but perhaps into the future someplace else. Cleanliness of the restrooms, safety of the floors. Obviously our restrooms would be better used if they're clean and safe. And fields working for kids that are in the area because they may not be able to travel distances, and that's really hard to coordinate travel for kids from one field to the next around the city. So with that.
We, again, were part of a taking care of our system group and talked a lot about utilizing and appreciating and valuing that system, looking certainly at increased hours at our community centers and accordingly increasing staffing to support those hours and to support the offerings at our community centers. Also partnering with existing organizations. There are a lot of incredible nonprofits, particularly working with individuals with disabilities, lifelong recreation, different ethnic and communities of color, and making sure that we're partnering with them to bring them into existing Seattle parks and recreation spaces, and then to reach out to the communities that they already work with and have really strong relationships with. Also looking at anytime recreation and access. I mean, talked a lot about kind of the parks that are here available in Delridge, and then all hours of the day we want trails and bridges and comfort stations that are available and safe and readily usable. We also looked a lot at, or thinking about kind of valuing the resources that we have at parks, both in terms of kind of the asset valuation, understanding like what is the monetary value of our parks, and then also what is the cultural, what is the health value of those parks, and continuing to kind of communicate that, work with City Council, talk about how important investing in our parks and recreation system is.
So I'm standing in place of our Park District Oversight Committee member, and we're over here at this table, and we thought that there's a real lack of clarity around marketing for the Parks Department. So how are people finding out what is actually being offered? Are we only finding out by walking in and picking up guides? Are people who are unaware that there are options online to find out what the program offerings are using the online option? So we wanted to know more about that. We thought that it would be important to have transparency in data around utilization and users. So if we could see when the park facilities were being used, then we could maybe make more thoughtful choices around picking times that aren't being used. And also, if we saw demographic data, we could take a look at targeting different users that aren't currently using the Parks Department. Making sure that there's access would increase the users as far as transportation, and making sure we're close to bus lines and having safe pathways. One person suggested at our table that if we offered nominal fees, like $1 or $2, it wouldn't be something in the middle of zero versus way too expensive. So people would be willing to pay $1 or $2 to drop in. Looking at building youth partnerships with some of our high frequency users. So we have a really good representation at our table between golf, pickleball, and roller derby. So actually our roller derby partners were asking, how can we as frequent users build partnerships with youth and bring youth in that way? Did I say that right? Okay. All-day programming for parents was important so that they could have the ability to drop kids off and not worry about where to have them at the second half of the day when it comes to summer programming. Doing maintenance in the wintertime in anticipation of summer programs was important. And I'm looking at my table in case I just brought my notes here. Did I miss anything? Okay, that was our table over here.
So our table was one of the planning for the future, and is that right? Better? We were planning for the future table, but we were also maybe the only table that was all pickleball, right? So keep that in mind when we deliver this report. So create dedicated pickleball courts, preferably covered pickleball courts. They wanted to see equity between tennis and pickleball. Porta potties, that came up not only at pickleball areas, but also on beaches, and there was a playground mentioned in West Seattle that attracted a lot of young children but did not have a place to use the facilities. Public-private partnerships, and they were proposing to do a partnership where they could help raise money for a pickleball facility similar to the tennis centers at Magnuson, and would be more than willing to help out on that. More community center hours, that would not only help for pickleball, but it would also help students that cannot use the facilities during the day and really have their primary opportunity on the weekends. And a future of fitness and health opportunities for all.
Sounds like we had some great conversations, a lot of themes here around, what's that sport with the racket in the back? I didn't catch that. But really speaks to new and emerging sports, so whether it's pickleball or roller derby or other things, the idea of sharing and doing multi-use spaces, because we frankly don't have the luxury to build any more single-use facilities anymore. So we've got to figure out how to work together there. I heard a lot about partnerships, either existing organizations, but even beyond that. We have lots of partnerships across the system, much more we can do around partnerships, safety, more stuff, scholarships. So great conversations. I can't wait to really dig into this. We did want to maybe spend a couple more minutes if there are any issues that anybody at any of the tables wanted to share that aren't on here yet, that either we missed. I know that when I was walking around, there's some conversations about open space and things like that. So any things that you don't see up here that you want to share, and remembering the caveat that everything is important, and again, thank you so much.